I'm going to tell you a story about a guy who had it all, or at least he acted like it. His name was Ali Abulaban, but online he was JinnKid, a TikTok star with nearly 1 million followers who specialized in impressions of characters like Scarface. This was San Diego, 2021, and for him, the digital world was a glittering paradise. That's the lie, though. His real life was a crumbling mess. On October 21st, that mess exploded in a high-rise apartment when his estranged wife, Anna Marie Abulaban, and her friend Rayburn Barron were shot dead. Get this, the killer didn't run. He confessed right away, first to his mom, then to the cops. So if we know who did it, what's the story? The puzzle for the jury wasn't who, but why. Was this a cold-blooded ambush by a control freak or a celebrity meltdown, the snap of a man losing his mind and his fame? You'll find the truth is way more chilling. He wasn't just hiding the monster in his apartment, he was broadcasting his entire nasty breakdown to millions of fans. That's what we need to figure out. I think the worst part of any true crime story isn't the final act. It's forgetting that the victims were real people, full of life, before they became just a name on a police file. We've got to fix that. Before she was a headline, before she was the dead wife of a famous, troubled TikToker, who was Anna Marie Abulaban? She wasn't some prop in her husband's videos, and she sure wasn't just a statistic. She was the center of a whole universe for the people who loved her. She was born in the Philippines, and her background tells you everything about her drive. You don't get from there to serving in the U.S. Air Force, stationed way out in Okinawa, Japan, no less, without having real ambition and guts. She was a dedicated service member. She knew how to hold her own.
Anna was vibrant. That's the word you hear over and over from the people who knew her best. She was beautiful, yes, but her friends talk more about her energy. She had this infectious spirit. My take is, she was the kind of person who made you feel better just by being in the room. You'll find that deep-down dedication carry over to everything she did, especially being a mother to her daughter, Amira. That little girl was her whole world. Her friends say she often spoke about the values she wanted to pass on, the quiet strength and resilience she'd learned from her own parents. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, about making a better life for her child than the one she started with. She met Ali when they were both in the service, and for a time, I'm sure it looked like a great start. Two driven people building a life together far from home. But the image Ali would later sell online, the perfect, happy marriage, that was never the truth for Anna. You could look back at her private texts, and you see a woman trying desperately to navigate the complex mess of her own home. You see the stress, you see the fear. But here's the thing, Anna was fighting back. She wasn't passive. By 2021, she was done being just a supporting player in Ali's online circus. She was starting to get her own online following, and that's not just a hobby. That was Anna gaining her own voice, her own stage, and her own sense of self-worth outside of his shadow. It was Anna building a foundation that didn't rely on Ali's shaky fame. She was planning to finally take control. She was actively setting up her new future, one where her daughter would be safe and happy, away from the turmoil of Ali's cocaine use and his unpredictable rage. You've got to admire that kind of courage. Most people would have just shrunk away. Anna stood up. Her sister, visibly upset during the trial, screamed at Ali about the abuse, saying she wished she had known, wished she could have flown over and just taken Anna and Amira away from him. That raw emotion tells you everything you need to know about the suffering Anna was hiding. She was trying to protect her family from the shame and the worry while she figured out her escape. You can just feel the crushing burden she was carrying.
Now, let's turn to Rayburn Cardenas Barron. He's not a footnote. He was a son, a brother, and a true friend. His family called him the glue. Think about that. The person who holds everyone else together, who makes sure the family stays close, who goes out of his way to help someone just because they need it. That's who Rayburn was. He was 29 years old. 29! He had his whole adult life ahead of him. His family talked about him with this profound, tearful heartbreak. They said he would do anything for them. He wasn't some kind of romantic suitor in a drama. He was Anna's friend. And that's the awful, simple truth of it. He was a good person doing a good deed, helping his friend clean up an apartment that had been vandalized by her estranged, jealous husband. Rayburn was the steady, caring family man whose loss left his sisters feeling broken, as they put it. They described the pain of losing him as so difficult that they have trouble living a normal, healthy life. That's the kind of crater a person like Rayburn leaves behind. Anna and Rayburn were two people trying to build normal lives. Anna was finally separating herself from a man whose fame had poisoned his mind, and Rayburn was just being the good, dependable friend everyone needs. They were pulled into the escalating, jealous, and frankly narcissistic world of Ali Abulaban for one simple reason. Ali saw people as property. He saw Anna's success and her budding independence as a direct threat to his ownership. He saw Rayburn as a convenient target because Rayburn was kind, and kindness, in Ali's twisted view, was a form of defiance. You see, the core tragedy here isn't the trial or the jail sentence. It's the sheer, senseless extinguishing of two bright, vibrant people who deserved so much more than to be a shocking chapter in a documentary. They were the people you'd want in your corner. They were the ones who had their lives ahead of them. That's why we care. That's why we can't forget them. Their strength and their desire for a quiet, decent life are the very things that made them targets.
Anna with her plans for a better future, and Rayburn, the family anchor who came to help a friend. They were strong, they were good, and they were caught in the crosshairs of a performer who mistook his social media fame for actual power. We must remember them not as victims, but as the people they were fighting so hard to be. This is the part of the story that makes your stomach turn. It's the moment when the lights go out. We're going to walk through the last day, minute by minute, because every single second proves one thing. What happened wasn't a mistake. It was planned. Anna Marie Abulaban made a big move right before the end. She was done. Her last normal act, if you can call it normal, was texting Ali that she wanted him gone. "I want you out of my life," she wrote. Simple, final. And that's what set everything in motion. For a man like Ali, that wasn't a text message. It was a threat to his entire self-image. It was the end of his performance. On the morning of October 21st, 2021, Anna takes their little girl to school. Routine stuff, right? But while she's gone, the violation begins. Ali uses a spare key, an electronic key card he wasn't supposed to have anymore, and sneaks into the high-rise apartment they once shared. Think about that for a second. He didn't just walk in, he invaded. He was already breaking the law, showing a clear disregard for Anna's boundaries and her demand that he leave her alone. Once inside, he doesn't just grab a shirt and leave. He acts out. He vandalizes the place. We don't have the full details of what he broke, but the police reports later confirm he made a mess, a show of petty rage that was his first form of punishment for Anna daring to walk away. It was a tantrum that was also a message: you can't control me. But the vandalism? That was just stage setting. The real cold-blooded part, the thing that shows his intent, happened next. Before Ali left, he did the unthinkable. He took his daughter Amira's iPad and installed a listening app on it, a secret bug. He planted it in the home, turning a child's toy into a surveillance tool. This is the critical juncture. This is where snapping ends and calculated, sinister stalking begins. A person in a genuine rage doesn't pause to download software and set up a long-term listening post. They act, then flee. Ali planned to keep watching, to keep listening, to maintain control from afar. He wanted to hear everything.
Anna comes home and finds the apartment in disarray. She knows immediately who did it. She calls a friend, venting her frustration. You can hear her fatigue, her wish for normalcy. She says she wants to clean the place up quickly so Amira won't be confused or scared when she gets home. She tells the friend she's going to get a restraining order. She's moving forward. She's building her wall of protection. She asks that friend to pick up Amira from school, giving her a window of time to try and restore some peace to her home. Then she calls Rayburn Barron. Rayburn was the good guy, the friend. Ali was already intensely jealous of Rayburn, mostly because Rayburn once paid Anna a compliment, a simple nod to her beauty. To Ali, that was disrespect. That was a challenge. Rayburn came over because Anna needed a hand. He was just being the glue his family knew him to be, helping a friend in a bad spot. It's sometime after 3 p.m. Ali is elsewhere, listening. The audio from that hidden app, that little secret tucked away on his daughter's iPad, will become the most damning evidence against him. He's tuning into his estranged wife's private life. And then he hears it. A man's voice. Rayburn's voice. I think the fog of self-pity and entitlement that Ali had been operating under finally broke. He didn't hear a conversation. He heard an insult. He grabbed his gun and rushed back to the apartment complex. Think about the drive. Think about the elevator ride up to that high-rise floor. He had minutes where the crime of passion argument falls apart. A passion crime is instant. This was a progression, a drive, an entry, a choice. The audio recording, later played in court, tells the story of the next few seconds. You hear the apartment door crash open. Ali finds Anna and Rayburn on the couch. There's no big argument, no pleading, no fight. There's just the awful, brutal sound of gunfire. Ali Abulaban shot Rayburn Barron 3 times. Then he turned the gun on his wife, Anna, and shot her in the head. He was so consumed by his possessiveness that he had to wipe them both out. They were simply sitting there, on a couch, helping each other.
The discovery wasn't made by a shocked neighbor or a returning friend. The discovery was made by Ali himself, the killer. He looked at the wreckage of 2 lives he'd just taken, and what does he do? Does he call 911? Does he scream for help? No, he calls his mother. That call, the first confession, marks the end of the last day. The scene of cold-blooded horror was later examined by police, but the first true police report was essentially recorded by the surveillance device Ali had planted. He left behind a crime scene and a digital footprint that utterly betrayed his defense. He fled the high-rise, picked up his daughter from school, the little girl whose iPad recorded her mother's death, and then he finally contacted the police. But every detail – the electronic key, the vandalism, the listening app, the quiet drive back, the multiple shots – it all screams premeditation. It's the difference between a broken man and a monstrous one. The last normal day ended not with a bang, but with a deliberate, lethal sequence of events set in motion the moment Anna tried to make her escape. It's a heavy thing to realize. The moment she asked him to leave, she signed her fate. That's the tragic, chilling timeline we can't ignore. Most true crime stories start with a phone ringing and a detective yelling, "We've got nothing, check the ex-boyfriend." But not this one. This story is different because the killer didn't run away, and he sure didn't hide. He confessed. The truth was handed to the police almost instantly. The first 48 hours after the shots were fired in that high-rise weren't chaotic in the typical sense.
There was no desperate manhunt. There was no stack of hundreds of dead-end tips that needed chasing down. Ali Abulaban called his own mother and told her what he did. That's a confession. Then, when he met up with the police, he didn't fight it. He admitted he killed Anna and Rayburn. The body of evidence was right there. So if we knew who pulled the trigger, why did the case drag on for 2 years? And why did the trial become such a brutal, drawn-out slugfest? The puzzle wasn't who did it. The puzzle was the intent. Was this murder or was it manslaughter? Was it planned or was it a psychotic accident? That became the single massive red herring the defense threw into the water, a crime of passion.
I think that's the slipperiest defense in the world. It tries to make you feel sorry for the killer, suggesting he wasn't really a monster, just a guy pushed too far. The defense team, hired to save Ali from a first-degree murder conviction, which means life without parole, had only one job: to prove Ali was out of his mind. They argued he just snapped. They claimed he was having a fit of rage so intense, so immediate, that he couldn't form the necessary intent to kill. You'll find the defense built their whole case on painting Ali as a victim of his own spiraling life. They focused heavily on his admitted cocaine use. They argued he was high on drugs that day. This wasn't some casual user either. Ali was snorting cocaine while live streaming to his fans. His defense wanted the jury to believe that when he heard Rayburn's voice on that hidden app, the mix of rage, jealousy, and heavy drug intoxication sent him into a drug-induced psychosis. Weeks turned into months as the defense built this case for chaos. They needed the jury to believe that the TikTok star was just a sad, broken man who lost control, not a calculated killer. If they could convince the jury he lost control, he'd be guilty of second-degree murder, and his sentence would be far less severe. The exposure, the time he'd have to serve would drop dramatically. That's the whole ballgame. But the prosecution, Deputy District Attorney Taryn Brast, refused to bite. She and the original investigators had to cut through this manufactured narrative of a man losing control to find the core truth. Did Ali intend to kill? Was it premeditated? They chased down every detail of Ali's life that preceded the shooting, not just the 2 minutes when the gun was fired. They had to prove that the snap was a lie. Think back to the evidence they gathered early on. It all came from Ali himself, but the way he presented it twisted the truth. He claimed he snapped when he saw Rayburn, but the investigators had the digital evidence that ripped that story apart.
First, they focused on the stalking. A person who snaps doesn't first go download and install a spy app on his 5-year-old daughter's iPad. A person who snaps doesn't plan ahead to gain entry into an apartment he was banned from using a key he shouldn't possess. That step alone, the bugging of the apartment, was a clear indicator of premeditation. It showed intent to control, intent to surveil, and intent to react to whatever he found. The investigators spent days piecing together the timeline of that app's installation, proving Ali had a window of hours between planting the device and using it. This wasn't spur-of-the-moment rage. This was a setup. Then, they went deep into Ali's own digital history. This is where the evidence becomes chilling. Detectives looked at his search history. What did they find? They didn't find searches for therapy or sobriety groups. They found searches for how to cut up and dispose of a body. Stop right there. A guy who snaps and regrets his actions doesn't search for that. That's the work of someone who has considered and possibly planned the absolute worst-case scenario. This evidence was a massive hole blown in the center of the crime of passion argument. The police had a paper trail of malice. The investigators also had to carefully examine Ali's entire history of domestic violence against Anna.
This wasn't one bad fight. Anna had filed a police report documenting his abuse just a month before the shooting. The prosecution brought in Anna's text messages where she expressed fear and her desire to leave. They showed a pattern of escalating violence and control. They weren't chasing a red herring of another suspect. They were chasing down all the reasons Ali's story of a sudden chaotic outburst was nonsense. They knew they couldn't just win the case. They had to overwhelm the snap defense with evidence of cold, calculated possessiveness. They studied the timeline of the shooting itself. Ali had to get the gun, get in the car, drive to the apartment, ride the elevator, and then open the door. Each of those steps was an opportunity to pause, to rethink, to not shoot. Brast argued that Ali had plenty of time to stop, and that his actions were willful, deliberate, and premeditated.
The defense, meanwhile, kept throwing up technicalities and emotional pleas. They argued that Ali was so high on drugs he couldn't have been in a sound state of mind. They even pointed out that Ali was re-racking his gun in between shots. Why would you do that? It's unnecessary in a shooting. Their argument was that this proved he was out of his mind, showing panic rather than control. The investigators, however, saw a man taking his time, making sure the weapon was cycling correctly, ensuring his work was done. Two different interpretations of the same grim fact. For the original detectives and the prosecution team, the long, cold night of this case wasn't about finding the killer. It was about disassembling the lie. They had to prove that Ali's fame, his ego, and his cocaine addiction didn't excuse him. They had to show that those things were merely the fuel for a jealousy so toxic it turned into an absolute demand for ownership. Anna wasn't a wife. She was his property. If he couldn't have her, no one could. That's the core truth the investigators fought for months to establish. The crime wasn't a sudden chaotic act. It was the final, premeditated act of a domestic abuser determined to exert total control. The sheer volume of evidence, the searches, the bugging, the history of abuse, that's what it took to neutralize the killer's most cunning red herring. It's tough to look at that much detail, but we must, because every piece of it proves that Anna and Rayburn were killed by a monster who knew exactly what he was doing. And that makes the whole thing so much worse, don't you think? This is where the story stops being just a murder case and starts becoming a deep dive into the truly messed up side of modern fame. We've established that Ali Abulaban was a killer. The police had his confession almost immediately. But what did he do after the police had him? Did he sit quietly, reflect on his sins, and ask for a lawyer? Not a chance. He performed. The community was stunned by the murder, sure, but what happened next was even stranger. The killer wasn't hiding under a rock or locked in silence. He was still very much in the spotlight. He gave an interview to a local news channel. You're talking about a man charged with taking 2 lives, and his first instinct is to manage his public image. That should tell you everything you need to know about the kind of ego we're dealing with.
He sat there, talking to the reporter, and what he said wasn't an apology for Anna or Rayburn. It was a complaint. He told the reporter that his social media fame, his JinnKid persona, was what made him snap. He actually said that the attention he got online was what messed with his brain, making him violent and aggressive. He was trying to blame his audience. He was trying to blame his own success. It's a jaw-dropping reversal of responsibility. He wasn't the monster, the followers were. But the real stomach-turning moment in that interview was when he talked about what he had truly lost. He said he was devastated.
But he wasn't talking about his daughter losing her mother. He wasn't talking about Rayburn's family losing their glue. He was talking about his career. He called his online presence, his whole TikTok performance, his baby. I think that phrase, calling his career his baby, is the bomb under the table. You see a killer more heartbroken over losing his business than losing his family. That's the cold, hard proof that his remorse wasn't real. His tears, later in the courtroom, weren't for the victims, they were for the loss of his own stage. The performance didn't end with the interview either. Even after he was behind bars, someone posted a video to his YouTube channel. It was a phone call from jail. What did he say? Did he send a public message to the Abulaban or Barron families? No, he told his fans he was doing okay for the most part. And then he apologized for not being able to make more content. Just process that for a minute. He killed 2 people, and his primary concern, the message he felt compelled to send out from jail, was an apology to his audience for the interruption in his programming. He was literally apologizing for the content gap. You couldn't write a more perfect piece of evidence for the prosecution if you tried. The defense could argue drug-induced psychosis all day long, but this man's actions, his interviews, his performance art from a jail cell show a different kind of pathology. They show a narcissistic killer who saw the murder not as a horrific end, but as a bizarre plot point in the ongoing story of Ali Abulaban. He was always performing. He mistook his online popularity for total immunity.
A Rolling Stone journalist who tracked the case put it best, talking about how Ali had a deeply unhealthy relationship with social media. It muddied his understanding of reality, she said. He thought the rules of the internet, where he was always the star, always the hero, always supported, applied to real life. When Anna defied his control, when she broke the script, he didn't just get mad, he erased the characters who spoiled his show. The truth is, Ali Abulaban was a self-confessed monster, and he performed his fake remorse right in plain sight. He was never hiding. He was always asking for applause. We saw the man he was long before the jury ever got the case file. And that makes the whole thing feel so much darker, doesn't it? You know the feeling when you've been stuck on a problem for days, and then you just shift your focus a little bit and the whole thing cracks open? That's what happened here. For months, the defense had everyone looking sideways, telling us the shooting was a chaotic mess, a pure accident of rage and drugs, a snap. They were saying Ali lost control. It wasn't planned. But the prosecution, led by Taryn Brast, knew they had to kill that story stone dead. They couldn't rely on finding some shocking new piece of evidence because Ali had confessed. All the proof was already sitting in boxes. The turning point wasn't a discovery. It was a fresh look at the killer's own movements. It was about changing the narrative from a whoops to a how dare you. Brast focused entirely on the minutes before the bullets flew. You'll find that for any murder case, if you can prove the killer had time to think, you destroy the crime of passion defense. And Ali gave them time, over and over again. Here's where the sequence of cold, calculated acts becomes the single most critical clue. Let's walk through it, because it's a terrifying list of actions that all prove one thing: intent.
First, there's the key card. Ali wasn't supposed to have that electronic key. Anna had told him to leave, and he was out. Yet he made sure he had a way to sneak back in. That's step 1 of the plan. You don't snap when you have to carry a spare key in your pocket just in case you feel like breaking in later. That's foresight. That's malice. Second, the break-in and vandalism. He didn't just walk in, grab his stuff, and leave a nice note. He went in there and created damage. Why? Because he wanted to make a point. He wanted to punish Anna. He wanted to re-establish dominance over the space she was trying to reclaim. That act of violation was a physical declaration of war. It wasn't just a tantrum, it was a warning shot fired at the relationship itself. Third, the hidden listening app. This, I think, is the true smoking gun. As we've discussed, a spontaneous shooter doesn't pause to install software on his daughter's iPad. He created a surveillance system. He turned their shared apartment into a cage he could peek into from anywhere. This shows an astonishing level of cold, controlling paranoia. He wanted to catch Anna, and he knew how to do it. The app wasn't an accident. It was his digital leash. Fourth, the drive time. When Ollie heard Rayburn's voice on the app, he had to get his gun, get into his car, and drive back to the building. That drive, however long it was, wasn't a blur of panic. It was time for Ollie to weigh his options. He could have called the police. He could have called a lawyer. He could have called his daughter's school. He chose none of those things. He chose to drive, armed, straight back to the confrontation he had designed for himself. Fifth, the elevator ride. You're alone, you're going up, you have the gun in your hand. You've got literally 30 seconds to a minute in a small enclosed space to think about what you're about to do. That's a final chance to turn around, and he didn't take it. When the prosecution laid out this sequence – keycard, break-in, surveillance app, armed drive, and no turning back – the narrative of a crime of passion just evaporated. They showed the jury that Ollie wasn't a man who lost control. He was a man who planned the opportunity to exert lethal control if his wife dared to move on.
The story shifted completely. It wasn't about Allie's chaotic, broken mind anymore. It was about Anna's final, planned execution by a man who saw her independence as a treasonous act. The premeditation was in the stalker acts, not just the shooting itself. That was the crack that brought the whole defense down. The monster wasn't hidden. He was caught in his own digital trap. This is the moment the jury finally got to see past the performance. It's the how done it. The defense spent the entire trial trying to tell a story about chaos and impulse, but the prosecution decided to use Ali Abulaban's own life, his own data, to tell the true story of cold, ugly intent. They didn't need witnesses, really. They just needed the killer's digital footprint. The trial became a procedural masterclass. The prosecutors weren't relying on theories. They were playing recordings and displaying search logs. They used the killer's evidence against him, and it was devastating. You'll find that in this case, the killer provided all the proof himself. He was so consumed by his own ego, he never thought his digital life would be the very thing that buried him. First, let's talk about the audio recording. Remember that listening app Ali planted on his daughter's iPad? That bug became the single most damning piece of testimony. The prosecution didn't just tell the jury what happened, they made the jury hear it. Think about the impact of that. In a courtroom, hearing the actual moments of the murder, the argument, the gunshots, that cuts through all the legal talk and all the defense's excuses. It's impossible to forget. It turns the victims from case files back into real people, just like we talked about. The sound was raw, it was brutal, and it proved beyond any doubt that Ali was there, in control of the situation and pulling the trigger multiple times. But the recording wasn't just about the what, it was also about the why. It showed no lengthy fight, no chaotic struggle where Ali was being attacked or threatened. It showed a sudden, swift execution. That silence before the shots, broken only by Ali's own entry, speaks volumes about the premeditation. Then came the digital forensics. This is where the investigation really dismantled the snap theory. The prosecution didn't just tell the jury that Ali was a controlling person,
They showed the jury the proof in his own search bar. They revealed his online queries, and they were chilling. I think the worst one, the one that makes you freeze, was his search for how to cut up and trash a body. That's not what a man who snapped looks up. That's the research of a monster planning for the aftermath of a murder. That single search proves two things. First, that he had already considered killing Anna, and second, that his crime wasn't impulsive. It was a contingency plan. You can't look at that search log and still believe the defense's story about a brief moment of drug-induced rage. It doesn't wash. The prosecution also spent massive amounts of time just detailing the timeline. They didn't want the jury to focus on the brief seconds of the shooting. They wanted them to focus on the huge amount of time Ali had to stop himself. They went back to the moments we talked about, the drive to the apartment, the walk to the elevator. Prosecutor Taryn Brast hammered this point home. She pointed out that Ali had ample opportunity to rethink his decision. He could have turned the car around. He could have left the gun behind. He could have used the elevator ride to take a deep breath and call a family member. He did none of those things. He chose to continue.
Brast used this procedural analysis to build her motive. She told the jury what the whole ugly case was about. It wasn't about love, jealousy, or drugs. It was about ownership. She told them, and I'll quote her because it's a brilliant summary of the motive, he was so possessive and controlling of Anna that if he could not have her, no one could. And she couldn't live, and any man she was with could not live either. That's the cold, hard logic of a domestic abuser, not a man in a fit of passion. The prosecution also used Ali's own history of violence against him. They presented the police report Anna had filed just a month earlier. They used Anna's fearful text messages. They used all the public and private evidence of his escalating abuse to prove that this murder wasn't an isolated incident, it was the inevitable end of a long, toxic pattern of control. This wasn't chaos. This was the final, lethal conclusion of his entitlement. The defense fought back, arguing about the re-racking of the gun, that Ali was so frantic he didn't know how to shoot it. But the logic failed against the weight of the digital evidence. How can a man be too frantic to fire a gun properly, but coherent enough to download a spy app and search for how to dispose of a body? The jury heard it all. They heard the sounds of the crime, saw the proof of his planning, and understood the motive of total lethal control. They didn't have to guess. The killer provided all the steps himself. And when the verdict finally came down, it was conclusive. First-degree murder. No confusion, no passion, just planned, purposeful killing. The procedural howdunit delivered justice. The long, brutal fight was over. For weeks, the jury had been forced to look into the ugliest parts of human nature, forced to listen to the killer's own recording of the final terrible seconds of two people's lives. They heard the defense's desperate story about a snap. They saw the prosecution's cold, unbending proof of premeditated control. On May 29th, the jury delivered the verdict. It was fast, it was final. Guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. That gavel hitting the wood was more than just a legal ruling. It was a roar of confirmation for a community that had been holding its breath since the day Ali Abulaban first got on social media and started acting like his own terrible god. The monster was given his name. Not JinnKid, not Scarface, but Killer. But the case wasn't truly finished until the sentencing. The defense tried one last Hail Mary, appealing for a mistrial, arguing some technical point about a single question asked during the trial that might have tainted the jury. Judge Frazier didn't buy it. Why would he? He knew what the jury knew. The defendant was on the stand for 3 days. They had every chance to judge his character. The idea that 2 small questions could overshadow the audio recordings
the search history, and the killer's performance. That's just not reasonable. Then came the day of the final punishment, September 6th. The courtroom was packed. You could feel the weight of 2 years of grief pressing down on that room. Before the judge spoke, the families of Anna and Rayburn finally got their full voice. Anna's sister stood there and spoke the truth of their pain, telling Ali she wished she had known the extent of his abuse, wishing she could have flown over and just rescued Anna. The anger wasn't just about the murder. It was about the years of misery he inflicted.
And Ali? Even facing a life sentence, he couldn't drop the performance. He stood there and told the judge that he deserved parole. He actually said the sentence, life in prison without parole plus 50 years for the gun charges, wasn't fair. He told Judge Fraser, "Being sent to prison forever feels like I'm being sent to hell." Judge Fraser, a man who'd seen it all, looked straight through the act. He called Ali a very selfish person. He confirmed what everyone outside of Ali's bubble knew. The tears he'd cried in court weren't for the lives he took. They were only for himself. He said Ali, in committing the crime, had literally become that terrible persona he copied online, a cold-blooded killer without remorse. Then came the final, crushing line. The bottom line here is you will die in prison. You will never be a free man. You will take your last breath there. The gallery erupted. Applause, cries of relief. It wasn't a celebration, not really. How can you celebrate when 2 wonderful people are gone? But as Rayburn's sister, Jordana Barron, said after the verdict, it was a profound release. It was justice. It was the knowledge that Ali Abulaban is never going to be able to do this to another person again. The killer, who spent his entire adult life performing for a camera and craving attention, was finally silenced. He was stripped of his audience, stripped of his name, and stripped of his freedom. The TikTok star who wanted the world to look at him is now locked away, where he will take his final breath far away from the spotlight he craved. The performance is over. And that, my friend, is the closest the world can ever come to setting things right for Anna Marie Abulaban and Rayburn Cardenas Barron. What do you think is the biggest lesson here? That social media fame can drive a man insane, or that some monsters were always monsters just waiting for an audience? I think it's both.